The Houston Cougars head on the road for another Big 12 game this weekend, but face a familiar foe in the Cincinnati Bearcats. We got an expert here to help us out.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to talk about the Houston and Cincinnati matchup. And I honestly watched a little bit of Cincinnati to get ready for this one. And I decided I need to bring on my buddy Neil Meyer to talk more about this. Neil, first of all, we're recording on Wednesday, full disclosure, we're recording on Wednesday night. How are you doing this Wednesday night?
I'm doing good, man. Doing good. As I told Parker earlier, I've been battling a little cold last few days, but starting to get back into the fold of things. So hopefully get a little bit healthier before the big game on Saturday.
Big game on Saturday. In pre-pod, I mentioned Houston obviously went to the buzzer at Memphis. Jamal Shead knocking the game winner was nice there. But I think about how good last year's team was. Honestly, on the road at Cincinnati, felt like one of the more difficult games. You know, a non-sprained ankle there, and not like things have been a lot different down the stretch of that game. And I got to ask, how has this year gone for this iteration of Wes Miller's of Cincinnati Bearcats?
Yeah, this year it's been an up and down battle. As many people know, the first 6 games of conference play has been top 25 opponents. So it's been something I think that was the most ranked conference opponents to start a season dating back to 1994, if I remember right. So going back 30 years, and I mean, you're looking at the losses, the wins. I mean, the 3 losses that they suffered in the first 6 games, well, the 4 losses they suffered in the first 6 games were just by about a total of 12 points. So you have the 1-point loss to Texas. You have the 3-point loss to Baylor. You lose by 5 to Kansas. I mean, these are all games where they are right there in the end. And I mean, the key thing that a lot of people talked about through the first few games was, hey, if the free throws were a little bit different, if you made a couple more free throws, it's a different outcome. But that was something they struggled on earlier in the season. But they've really started to find their groove down the stretch. And obviously, as well, this is a Cincinnati team that hasn't been able to really display their full arsenal at any point this season because you had the waiver situation with Aziz Bandaogo and Jamil Reynolds. CJ Frederick gets banged up in the Stetson game, which was one of the final games of non-conference play. He hasn't even been able to really jump back into a practice yet. He's still working his way back from the hamstring injury. So for a lot of people on the outside, like they see the physicality and the style of play that Wes Miller and the Bearcats bring to the table, but a lot of people forget that they're not 100% healthy yet either.
Well, and Cincinnati will actually, be the third team from Ohio that Houston's gotten to play this season. So I want to actually take a step further back. Common opponents we have between the two of us are Xavier and Dayton. Now, Houston had a little bit more luck against Dayton in the Charleston Classic, but admittedly, they also played them back before Thanksgiving. That's a long time ago. Y'all got them a little more recently. And then Houston and Xavier played a really, really close game. Houston's able to come away with, but looks like y'all had a fairly, we'll say, close one as well. I mean, both games, I think Houston won by 6 and y'all won by 5, right? Y'all lost by 5. So, like, overall thing being a 10-point-ish window there. In looking at those are your most difficult non-conference matchups. You lost close ones in those. And honestly, like the next most difficult one I see across here might have been Northern Kentucky. I thought was solid. Y'all beat the brakes off of them.
Georgia Tech was a really good team as well before they got hot.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a lopsided win now because they beat them by 35, and then Georgia Tech has their 3 AAC wins are all versus top 25 teams, which is crazy.
Which out of nowhere. I guess my question I'm trying to get a long way, winded around about way to is, do you feel like you are ready for Big 12 play? Because you did come out and have these very competitive close games to start.
Yeah, I thought they were ready for Big 12 play. I mean, you look at the roster style that Wes Miller and his staff has built. I mean, I thought they did a fantastic job in the transfer portal. And then you mentioned the Dayton and the Xavier game. I thought the Xavier game was definitely a game they could have won, and then the Dayton game just didn't go their way. And I mean, in the opening minute and a half, you lose Aziz Bandago. He gets banged up on what is then at the time a 3-week-long back injury. I mean, he finished the Dayton game with it, but I mean, after that, he's out 3 weeks with the back injury. That was also the first game that Jamil Reynolds got clearance by the NCAA following the TRO. So, I mean, they also inserted him to a lineup, but I believe he only played 6.5 minutes, if I remember right, in that game. But that was also a game, too. CJ Frederick did get banged up initially in the Dayton game. So they got banged up versus Dayton, but that's a Dayton team. Everyone knows that's a physical Dayton team and a Dayton team that's capable of making a deep run in this NCAA tournament. But I thought they were ready for Big 12 play. I really did. And when they came around time for conference play, I mean, Aziz Bandago just started getting healthy. You go on the road, I think the momentum changing for the Big 12 was you start your Big 12 play and you go on the road in a tough environment at BYU and get that road win. I thought from there, yeah, I mean, I believe they held them to the lowest points on the season. I think it was only like 58, if I remember right. But that was the game where Trevin Nell just couldn't miss anything. And then Mark Pope took him out of nowhere, and he should have left him in. And dude was 9 for 11 from behind the arc at one point. So it was a weird coaching strategy down the stretch. But I think that was the moment where people were kind of realizing, like, hey, Wes Miller and the Bearcats are ready for the Big 12. And then you get the game versus Texas, it was a controversial ending. I think we all go back and watch the replay. I think we can all definitely say that was a travel to end that game. But it was definitely fair. Those two games right there, I thought were the momentum changing, getting them ready for the Big 12. And then, I mean, it's never easy. Your second week, you're going to Kansas and you find yourself down 14 and rattle back at halftime to tie the game, especially in Allen Fieldhouse.
Well, and I would point out you beat BYU by more points than Houston did in BYU. So much like we just talked about Xavier and Dayton being like indicators and common opponents. So the common Big 12 opponents, you could argue, kind of go back and forth here. Houston lost at TCU, and y'all beat them in Cincinnati. And I know road and home was a big deal in this conference, but I guess I'm just asking because they have so many close, both wins and losses. Kind of what's been the difference maker? If it wasn't that they weren't ready for Big 12 play, what has been the difference maker in these close contests before we get to this weekend?
Yeah, I definitely think the first two losses, at least, definitely Baylor and, well, Texas was a game where, I don't know if you remember, but John Newman missed the free throws, the 2 free throws there with 3 seconds left to ice the game. That would have potentially iced the game. He missed it, and then it allowed them to come down, set up a timeout to get Max Abe miss the game-winning shot. But free throws really what killed him. I believe, if I remember right, Parker, they were shooting 58, 60% from the line, and everybody knows, like, that's simply not going to win you games in the Big 12. You have to be able to take the free points when it matters. And ever since they've been able to turn that around, I mean, you look what they saw. They shot 10 for 10, a perfect 100% from the line versus Texas Tech, and look what happened. Those free throws were the difference maker, especially in a tough environment. I believe that was the first time since 2005 that they went a perfect 100% from the foul line. So another 20-year accomplishment there. So, I mean, free throws was definitely the thing, but also just staying healthy. I mean, Aziz Bandago was banged up pretty heavily with that back injury. Jamil Reynolds was still trying to find his footing. Victor Locken found himself dealing with most of the double teams up there in the front court. And from there on out, I mean, people were just trying to find their role. And you lose arguably your best shooter in CJ Frederick. People were just still trying to find their role. And then Simas Lukosius is a guy who twisted his ankle versus Howard. Then he gets hit by a car. And then he gets another minor injury. So, I mean, he was battling a whole lot of adversity. And then it was great to see how he responded. I mean, responded really well versus Texas. And then he had a great night the other night versus Texas Tech. So, overall, I mean, they were just dealing with a lot of adversity in the early season. And now that they're back, like, starting to get healthy again, find their rhythm, this could be a team that can make a deep run in the Big 12 conference tournament, in my opinion.
Well, and we're going to get to this Saturday's game. It's a big game for both programs this weekend, but I don't mean to spoil the weekend for diehard college sports fans. I don't know if you've heard about this thing called the Super Bowl, but it's a pretty big event this weekend. And our buddies at FanDuel have this cool offer right now as America's #1 sportsbook and getting people ready for Super Bowl Sunday. That if you put down a $5 bet and it hits, you can get $200 back in bonus bets. Now, Neil, I'm not going to sell you out if you're a gambling man or not a gambling man. I got the Chiefs as a 2.5-point dog. I kind of think that's having Patrick Mahomes as a dog at all feels a little ridiculous. What are your thoughts on the Super Bowl quickly?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's kind of hard to bet on Patrick Mahomes at this point. It's kind of similar to betting against Tom Brady. I mean, I would like to see the 49ers win just because, I'm a Cincinnati native through and through. I don't like Kansas City beating up on my Bengals every year since the Super Bowl run. But overall, I think it's going to be a great game, but you got to take the Chiefs, in my opinion.
Yeah, you got to keep Patrick Mahomes somewhere where Joe Burrow can catch him, is what I'm hearing.
Yep.
But whatever you think we're both ludicrous, or you think that's the way to go, whatever you think, you should go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, LOCKEDON. Again, $5 down. If that bet hits, you get $200 back in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel. It's just a partner of the NFL. So, Neil, this weekend, I don't know that any program would call this a Super Bowl, but every Big 12 game feels important because it's real easy to lose like 2 or 3 in a row in this conference and drop down the standings really far. It's real easy to, frankly, get to feeling too good about yourself because you win 1 or 2 in a row and then you get hit in the face with 3 tough ones in a row. The road aspect for Houston, this one worries me because last year when these two teams met up, I thought Cincinnati gave Houston about all they could handle pretty much until I saw them play against Memphis and have a similar, contest on the road. Cincinnati is a really tough place to play. What do you remember about last year's game in this one? I think it was a 6-point Houston win. And again, pretty key ankle roll towards the end of that one, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was definitely a difference maker. And obviously you're looking back at this matchup from a season ago. I mean, Jarris Walker was versus Victor Locken was the matchup that everyone was talking about. But this year, I think that matchup's going to be a little different. And obviously last year, the Bearcats had a great team with Landers Nolley, David DeJulius, Victor Locken. John Newman was out for this game. So there's a lot of differencing facts from last season's team to this season team. But last season team, it was a great game. It came down to the end, but that's Fifth Third Arena. It's going to be an environment that a lot of teams are going to come in, and it's something that we have actually heard, Parker, quite frequently from opposing coaches throughout the Big 12 is they were like, man, I didn't know this environment was like this. It's a tough environment to play in. It really is.
Well, it shows my age, but I think of Cincinnati when I was first getting into college sports as like Kenyon Martin and like I think of incredible basketball. So I think that's just kind of what generation you grow up in and what kind of basketball they were playing or whatever could obviously shift some of those things. Victor Locken, you point out, he had a rough time last year. He got the Jarris Walker matchup, and it did not go his way. To be fair, Jarris Walker was a lottery pick. Is doing very, very well. He had some G League games. He's been doing very well for the Indiana Pacers since. And frankly, his key trait is athleticism, and that's really hard to cover, right? This year, Locken is having a strong year and will probably draw the Juwan Roberts matchup. What is Victor Locken doing so well this year? What growth have you seen out of him? As someone who watched the Bearcats pretty closely.
Yeah, I think the biggest growth for him was he added the 3-point shot to his game. And that was something he's worked on for the last 2 seasons. And I mean, we've seen him knock down some crucial threes earlier in the season, but he's really struggled as of late behind the arc. I think he's 5 for his last 30. So not shooting the best from behind the arc as of late, but he's also kind of been up and down. I mean, he missed the UCF game due to the illness. As many people know, we were battling an illness that really kind of went through the locker room and affected a lot of different players. So that illness happened. And then next thing you know, I feel like he's still trying to find his way back, build that confidence back up. He's really kind of struggled since the Kansas game a little bit. Obviously, you're adding a guy like Jamil Reynolds into the fold, Aziz Bandego. You're having a healthy John Newman kind of resurge. But I think right now, this is going to be the matchup. Victor Locken versus Juwan Roberts. Everyone knows what kind of player Juwan Roberts is. I think he's averaging 9.7 rebounds, and he's a physical presence there in the front court for Houston. And it's going to be an interesting matchup, but I'm really interested to see how Juwan Roberts responds in the front court, because not many teams have seen a guy like Aziz Bandaogo, who's 7'1" with basically a 10-foot just standing straight up. I mean, his arms at the rim, basically. So, I mean, not many teams have seen a guy like Aziz Bandaogo. So I'm kind of curious to see how Juwan Roberts plays versus that matchup there with Aziz Bandaogo and Victor Locken.
Well, and Houston prides themselves on finding these like 6'8", 6'9" post players with long arms, so a little more mobile typically. I mean, you saw with Jarrett and Jawan last year. Daniel Skillings is an interesting matchup for me too, as I'm looking through this in my scouting report I've made for myself here. He is a pretty strong shooter from behind the arc. On 4 attempts per game, he's shooting over 31%. He's also listed at 6'6", which I didn't know what he'd be listed at. I kind of figured he'd be a little taller. Then the matchup I assume he'll get for Houston is Emmanuel Sharp, who's listed at 6'5". If you told me he was 6'4", I'd believe you. What does Daniel Skillings do besides shoot the ball very? What does he do to get his points? He's leading the Bearcats in points per game, and kind of growing into a new role.
Yeah, I think the thing that drives Daniel Skillings' game is his energy and his athleticism. And he is just infectious on the offensive rebounding. That's something that he has been able to thrive and make a great living off of this season. I mean, we saw it the other night versus Texas Tech. I believe he got a missed free throw, put it back up to take the lead. That's something he thrives so well on. I mean, we always kind of joke around and we're like, oh, there's those go-go gadget arms, because he's so long and he's so lengthy. He's listed at 6'6", but he's actually closer to 6'7", and his wingspan is just ridiculous. I mean, he's a high flyer. Anytime the ball is up there, just get ready, because Daniel Skillings is going to go off the page for it. So he's a guy, I mean, he's ridiculously athletic, and people forget he didn't actually start playing high school competitive basketball until he was a junior in high school. So, I mean, he's only been playing like 3 years, since basically competitive for 3 years. And look at where he's got right now. He's been drawing a lot of attention. There's been a couple scouts at some games checking him out, and the potential is high. I mean, Tom Crean said it the other night versus the Texas Tech game was Daniel Skillings is going to play in the NBA one day, was the quote he said on the broadcast. So, but really stands out for him, Parker, is his athleticism and his energy to really go and affect the game on the glass.
Well, you mentioned the potential pro future. He's got the body for it, right? 6'6", long arms, a pretty solid jump shot, especially for guys you mentioned that have not played high-level basketball for very long. Those don't just happen. Like that. That's a pretty gifted athlete. Emmanuel Sharp is a little bit smaller, a little bit stockier. Interestingly enough, also a, no pun intended, sharpshooter from behind the arc, and that'll be an interesting matchup in this one for sure. The marquee matchup here, though, I feel like is going to be none of these big guys, as much fun as it is to watch the big guys, but the point guard play. Every game Houston plays in, it feels like it's Jamal Shead versus the other team's point guard. And it feels like there's a reason Houston's won 20 games already this year, is Jamal Shead wins that matchup a lot of the time. And then like they played Kansas and he didn't, right? And that's just how Houston goes. Day Thomas is a very talented point guard. He's listed at 6 feet tall. He frankly looks to be a similar type of athlete as Jamal. He's getting 10.8 points per game, 3.4 assists per game, a downhill attacking the rim kind of scorer. Talk to me about Day. Talk to me about the Jamal matchup. What do you see happening between these 2 point guards this weekend?
Yeah, that's definitely going to be the matchup to watch. I mean, Jamal Shead is playing like a Big 12 first-team all-conference player. He really is. And, I mean, he's making his case potentially for Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, and that's something he's carried so much pride on throughout his career, was his defensive ability. But that matchup's going to be interesting with Day Thomas, because Day Thomas, not many people know, he came from a junior college, so this is his first true NCAA D1 college basketball level. So, I mean, he's came in and he's taken the bull by the horns for this Cincinnati Bearcats team. I mean, he's averaging almost 11 points a game, and he can really dish the ball off really well, but he's great at drawing contact. I mean, he stands 6 foot tall, Parker, but I think there's some people that forget who didn't watch the junior college tape. He's got a 42.5-inch vertical, and he has tried to put a couple people on a poster. I believe earlier in the season, Parker, he tried to go over someone who was 7'1", and he almost had him. And it was like off the back of the rim. I mean, the athleticism is through the roof, but he has started to find his groove as of late. He's really been able to settle in. Wes Miller has praised his defensive end because obviously John Newman is the engine that makes the train go for this Bearcats team, especially with what he's able to do on the defensive end. But Day Thomas is right there behind him in terms of the defensive effort. And it's going to be a matchup. It really will be. It's going to be a matchup where a lot of people across college basketball should tune in for because it's going to be an exciting one at Fifth Third Arena on Saturday.
Well, and he's not a Texan, but I do try and point out when there are Houstonians or Texans on the rosters. He went to Kilgore Junior College. So that is a Texas junior college connection for folks in Houston or the Houston area that might recognize junior college basketball. I would point out that is a tough-nosed junior college basketball program, right? Like tough kids come out of that. And I feel like that's the kind of athlete we're seeing. When you talk about being able to like fly through 7-footers to dunk on top of people, that takes a certain kind of mindset and attitude. Neil, I assume you're going to pick Cincinnati in this one, home court being a significant advantage. What has to go well for the Bearcats for that to happen?
They have to win the battle of the glass. And that's something we have preached about all season. That's what they do so well, is rebound the basketball. I believe they're top 10 in the country in rebounding. They have to find a way to win the battle of the glass. I think that they can win the battle of the glass tremendously. If you can maybe beat Houston by a 6 to 8 margin there on the glass, that's what you need. You can't turn the ball over. Houston is a team that they have too many options that they can score, whether that's LJ Cryer, Jamal Shead, Juwan Roberts. They have too many options that can score. So you cannot turn the ball over. But you also have to do what they did versus Texas Tech and make your free throws. That is something we have harped on for the last few games since the free throws weren't going their way. Because they make their free throws, it's potentially a different game, but they know the physicality that Houston brings. They know it's going to be a hard match. Wes Miller even said it yesterday that in his press conference that nobody in this country can mimic what Kelvin Sampson does on defense. And that's what makes Houston so good. So they know the challenge at hand, but for them to win, you have to limit the turnovers, keep the turnovers under 12, make your free throws, and win the battle of the glass, in my opinion.
Well, you mentioned Battle of the Glass. I'd point out that Cincinnati is, as I'm looking here on Sports Reference, they're top 10 in the country in total rebounds. And both Houston and Cincinnati are both top 10 in the country in offensive rebounds. Houston has a slight edge on offense, but is significantly further back in the rankings on the defensive side. So interesting matchup there because I think Houston also thinks of themselves as the team that, wins the turnover battle, wins the rebounding battle, et cetera. And it's kind of good basketball coaches are good basketball coaches for a reason, right? Like it's like-minded approaches for sure. I said, I think you're going to pick them to win. So I don't mean to make you go against yourself here. If this game were to spiral out of control for the Bearcats, what weaknesses do you see in them that Houston would be exploiting for them to go that way?
I definitely think the opportunity to get out and run, that's something that the Bearcats like to do on their end. But if Houston can get out and run, if they can find ways to tire them down, if they can get some foul trouble, whether that's Aziz Bandago, Victor Locken, if they can get the Bearcats into foul trouble or right there in the point guard, Jamal Shead's a very physical player himself. If they get into any kind of foul trouble, I think this game can really take a spiral out of hand. So they gotta contain the fouls, especially with guys like Day Thomas, John Newman, and the big front court for Cincinnati.
You mentioned foul trouble, and I'm on Sports Reference here looking up stuff as I watch some stuff on YouTube to get ready and pulled up one or two things on the nice thing about being the Big 12 now is all the stuff's on ESPN Plus whenever you want it, right? They have 7 guys playing roughly 25 or more minutes per game. And there's a big drop, I should say, between 7 and 8. Is depth a real problem for them, or is that just because the first 7 guys are just good? Like, what's the big rationale there? Do you have any idea?
I think it's just the first 7 guys are just that good. You look down, CJ Frederick's their pure best shooter, and he hasn't even been able to touch the court since December 22nd. So, you add him back into the mix. It's throwing a lot on a guy like Simas Lukosius' plate. Dan Skillings has seen a lot of minutes fall into his plate because of that. But overall, I just think that's their depth. They're that good. Everyone kind of realized what kind of caliber John Newman was, but there was a lot of questions that fans and whatnot were wondering about. How would John Newman respond after the knee injury? Because this is his second knee injury in his career. So for him to respond and come back and have arguably his best season, me potentially, Parker, I think John Newman has solidified a shot at Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. And I don't think many people expected him to come back and be that guy who would will this train for 33, 34 minutes a game potentially.
Especially coming off an injury, like you said. Back up a step, though, because you mentioned CJ Frederick. Is he available to play this game? For the folks at home that are Houston fans listening, this guy shoots 44% from three, shoots 4.5 of them a game, a very, very talented scorer, listed at 6'3", does it off movement, does it off the catch, hard to keep track of, has played at Iowa and Kentucky before this. I mean, he's a good basketball player. Is he going to be eligible to play this weekend?
It's trending if it was up to based off the press conferences, to say the least, Parker, it sounds like they're probably going to aim next week, maybe, is where it's at. The update Wes Miller gave on his radio show last week was kind of up in the air. Like, it was kind of like a roller coaster. They were still waiting for him to give him the go. But he's gone through a couple workouts. But based on the press conference yesterday, he hasn't done anything live or anything yet. So I don't expect him to see any court time on Saturday unless something happens here in the last few days where he finds some practice minutes or something. But if it's up to me right now, I'm still thinking they kind of hold him out for this one.
Well, and frankly, we also know that there's a long Big 12 conference slate after this and the Big 12 conference tournament, stuff like that. So I get the bigger picture. I just hadn't heard that he was available or not. So you mentioned him in the rotation, and I was like, oh, man, if he's the seventh guy, that's a very dangerous seventh score, right? Like I was like, wait a second, that they're going to recalibrate some of the calculations I'm doing in my head here.
The hamstring injury occurred during the Dayton game. He missed the Merrimack game. They held him out due to precaution. Then the very next game, he retweaks the opposite hamstring. So it wasn't the same one. It was the opposite one.
Neil, I actually would predict a Houston win on our side. And I think that it's interesting to watch these fan bases go back and forth, Old American Athletic Conference foes facing off in the Big 12 and frankly doing very well in it. People can find you and all the coverage you have of the Cincinnati Bearcats where?
Yeah, so you can find me at thefrontofficenews.com. You can also find some of my work at allbearcats.com too, over there with Russ Heltman and James Rapine. So yeah, you can check us out over at the Front Office News, All Bearcats. And then for all your Cincinnati content, we do have a podcast called the Bearcats Blitz, partnered with Believe. So you can check us out there as well.
Thank you for coming on tonight and talking a little bit of preview of this one. Neil, always good to have you on for all things Houston and Cincinnati. I am going to say, though, I hope this basketball game goes better than the football game from the last time we talked, because that got a little ugly for me.
Yeah, it sure did.
All right. Take care, Neil.
Awesome.